Hey there, friends. She was a single black mother working double shifts as a waitress, forgotten by the world, underestimated by everyone. Then one day, a billionaire walked into her diner and recognized her as his brilliant college friend. What started as a simple reunion turned into something extraordinary. He helped her open her dream restaurant, but just when success was within reach, hatred struck. Her café was set on fire by those who didn't want her to rise. But she refused to back down. Instead, she rebuilt stronger, turning flames of hate into fuel for a community revolution. From waitress, to founder, to national inspiration, Rachel Parker didn't just survive racism, she rose above it. If you love these types of stories, then don't forget to comment down below from where you are watching. You can support us by liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel. The morning sky over Atlanta was painted in soft oranges and purples, the city slowly waking up to another busy day. Traffic hummed lazily, and the sharp scent of roasted coffee beans drifted from corner cafes. In the heart of the city, nestled between towering skyscrapers and luxury condos, sat a small, almost forgotten diner called Rosie's Kitchen. It had red leather booths that squeaked when you slid into them, faded checkered floors, and a warmth that seemed out of place in the glass and steel city it called home. This wasn't a place for business meetings or Instagram foodies. It was a place for people who worked hard, prayed harder, and knew the value of a warm meal made with love. That morning, the bell above the diner's door jingled as it opened, and a tall man in a tailored gray suit stepped inside. His name was Thomas Green, a name plastered across billboards, business journals, and tech magazines. Once a broke college kid with nothing but a laptop and an idea, he was now one of America's youngest self-made billionaires. He'd founded ByteBranch, a software company that revolutionized digital infrastructure for schools and hospitals. But despite all his wealth and accolades, Thomas had a quiet, humble air to him. He still spoke with the southern drawl he was raised with. He still called his mother every Sunday. And this morning, instead of heading to a 5-star hotel brunch, he'd told his driver to take him somewhere real. "I just want some eggs, grits, and a cup of strong coffee," he'd said. "Somewhere that feels like home." And that's how he ended up at Rosie's. He adjusted his cufflinks, more out of habit than necessity, and walked toward the back corner booth, the one by the window where the sunlight poured in. As he sat, he barely glanced up, eyes fixed on the day's news on his phone. But as the waitress approached, he heard a voice. A soft, familiar, slightly raspy voice. The kind of voice that once filled dorm hallways with laughter. "Hi, welcome to Rosie's. Can I get you started with some coffee?" Thomas froze. His fingers slowly lowered the phone. He looked up, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stop. There, standing in front of him with a notepad in one hand and a coffee pot in the other, was a face he hadn't seen in over 20 years, but one he could never forget. "Rachel?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The waitress blinked. She leaned in slightly, trying to match the familiar features with a name buried deep in her past. Her eyes widened. "Thomas? Thomas Green." Her voice trembled slightly, and her lips curled into a surprised smile. Thomas stood quickly, almost knocking over his chair in the process. "Rachel Parker. I don't believe it." They hugged, an awkward, hesitant hug at first, one that softened after a second as the years between them melted away. When they pulled apart, Thomas got a better look at her. She was still beautiful, but in a quiet, worn-out way. Her hair was pulled back in a bun, a few gray strands sneaking through. There were gentle lines around her eyes, the kind etched by years of struggle, not age. Her smile was warm but weary. "I can't believe you're here," Rachel said, sliding into the booth across from him. "What are you doing in this part of town? You don't exactly look like the usual crowd around here." Thomas chuckled. "Driver suggested it. Said the food was good and the coffee even better. Didn't expect to run into one of the smartest people I've ever known." Rachel rolled her eyes, but her cheeks flushed at the compliment. Please. That was a lifetime ago. He tilted his head. What happened, Ratch? You were going to be a lawyer. I remember how passionate you were, always debating professors, reading case law for fun. Rachel looked down at her hands, the notepad still clenched between her fingers. Yeah, well, life had other plans, she said quietly. She took a deep breath, then started to speak. Daddy passed during sophomore year. Stroke. Mama couldn't afford the bills on her own. I left school, came home to take care of her and my little brother. After she got sick too, I had to take whatever job I could find. Thomas's face softened. He leaned forward. Why didn't you reach out? I would've. No, she said quickly, raising a hand. I didn't want a handout. I wanted to make it on my own. Her voice cracked slightly, and she paused to regain composure. But it wasn't just about money, Thomas. I tried to go back. Tried to find work in the city. Sent out resumes, showed up for interviews. You know what it's like when they see you walk in and their whole attitude changes. He nodded solemnly. Yeah, I know. I had the grades, the drive, the references. But none of that mattered. Not when your last name doesn't ring any bells, or when your skin color makes people assume things before you even speak. She gave a small, bitter laugh. So here I am. Been at Rosie's 6 years now. Pays the bills. Keeps the kids fed. It's not much, but it's honest work. There was silence for a moment. Thomas looked at her with something deeper than pity. He saw dignity, strength, resilience. The world had tried to break her, but she had carried her family through fire, and was still standing. How old are your kids now? He asked gently. Jordan's 17. Bright kid. Wants to study engineering, just like you did. He's got a mind for machines and dreams too big for this diner. Her eyes lit up as she spoke of her son. And Maya, she's 12 going on 30. Always writing. Poetry, stories, whatever her little heart feels. She's amazing. Thomas smiled, imagining Rachel's kids carrying the same fire she once had in college. He felt something stir inside him, something between guilt and purpose. He thought of the board meetings, the sleek offices, the millions in his accounts, and then of Rachel, who had just as much promise, now struggling to make ends meet. She rose from the booth, brushing invisible crumbs off her apron. Anyway, I should get back to work. Boss gets jumpy when I sit too long. Thomas stood with her. Rachel, he said softly, let's stay in touch. I think there's something I can do. She tilted her head. Thomas, I don't want. I know, he said, raising a hand. But I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a chance. Let's talk more, okay? Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Okay. As she walked away, refilling mugs and delivering plates, Thomas sat back in the booth, his mind racing. He didn't know exactly what the next step was, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let the world ignore someone like Rachel Parker any longer. Because sometimes, fate doesn't just bring people back into your life, it gives you a second chance to do what's right. The rest of that day, Thomas Green couldn't concentrate. Meetings blurred together, emails went unread, and even the ever-buzzing energy of his office in Midtown Atlanta couldn't shake the image of Rachel Parker from his mind. Back in his luxury suite, overlooking the skyline from the 35th floor, he stood quietly at the window, coffee untouched in his hand. For the first time in a long while, he felt deeply unsettled, not by the markets, not by competition, but by something far more personal. Seeing Rachel again had stirred a part of him he hadn't visited in years. A time when they were just two broke college kids at Georgia State, sharing textbooks and midnight ramen, dreaming about who they'd become. And now, he had become everything the world praised. But Rachel, she had become invisible. That evening, Thomas picked up his phone and cancelled his dinner with investors. He wasn't in the mood to sit through another round of cocktails and talk about returns. Instead, he returned to Rosie's. When he walked in, Rachel was still there, wiping down tables and laughing with an elderly couple in the corner. Her smile was genuine, but her shoulders sagged the way only people carrying too much weight for too long could. She turned and noticed him right away. "You again," she said with a half-smile, walking over. "Back for more grits?" "Back for more Rachel," Thomas replied, sliding into the booth. She chuckled and sat across from him again, this time unprompted. There was a familiarity now, a fragile but growing bridge between the past and the present. The clinking of dishes and hum of conversations filled the air around them, but in that booth, it felt like they were back in the library basement, whispering dreams under flickering fluorescent lights. Thomas leaned in. "Can I ask you something personal?" Rachel raised an eyebrow but nodded. "You're gonna ask anyway." He smiled. "Do you ever feel cheated?" She blinked, surprised. "Cheated?" "Yeah," he said. "Like, you did everything right. Worked hard. Studied harder. Showed up. And still ended up here." Rachel looked down at her hands again, fingers idly tracing the edge of her apron. "Every day," she said softly. "Especially when I see folks I went to school with doing big things. It's not jealousy. It's just this question that haunts me. What if?" She paused. "But then I think of Jordan and Maya. They're the reason I keep moving. I may not have much, but I give them everything I can. Food, warmth, wisdom, faith. I tell them, you're gonna get out. You're gonna rise above." She looked at Thomas, eyes sharp now. "But it's hard, Thomas. Real hard." He nodded slowly, trying to find the words. "It shouldn't be," he said. "Not in this country. Not when you have the brains and the will. But let's be honest, it is. Because too many doors are slammed shut before people like you even knock." Rachel leaned back. "It's not just about being poor, you know. I've seen white kids come in here broke, same as me. They get a few second chances. Someone gives them a hand up, not a handout, just belief. Me. I walk into a job interview, and before I speak, I already see it in their eyes. She's not what we had in mind." Thomas's jaw tightened. "That's the part that eats at me," he said. "Because I know you. You could have run a law firm. Or started your own. And now you're here, because the world refused to see your worth." Rachel looked out the window, the streetlights now glowing in the dusk. "Sometimes I wonder what kind of life I'd be living if things had gone different. If Daddy hadn't died. If Mama didn't get sick. If I didn't have to drop out." She turned back to Thomas. "But wishing doesn't change diapers or pay the power bill. So I just do what I have to." The weariness in her voice crushed him. But beneath it, he also saw resilience. The kind of strength that couldn't be faked. He hesitated, then asked, "Do your kids know everything you've done for them?" Rachel gave a small smile. "Not yet. They'll understand one day. Right now, I just want them to live their childhood. Let me carry the weight so they don't have to." Thomas sat back, heart full. He wasn't looking at a waitress. He was looking at a warrior. A mother. A woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to keep her family's light from going out. "Rachel," he said gently, "I know you don't want help, but would you let me invest in you? Not charity. Not a pity move. I'm talking about a real opportunity. Something built from your heart, your vision. I think the world's been missing out on someone like you." She looked at him, unsure. "What are you even saying?" He smiled. "Let's talk tomorrow. I've got an idea. Something big. Something with your name on it. Rachel laughed, shaking her head. You haven't changed, Thomas. Always dreaming big. He looked her in the eyes. No, Rachel. This time, I'm dreaming with you. And as they sat in that small booth in a forgotten diner, a new chapter was beginning, one born not out of wealth, but of faith. Faith in old friends. Faith in second chances. And most of all, faith that maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing at the right time could change more than one life. It could change everything. The next morning, Rachel barely slept. Her mind ran in loops, thoughts of Thomas, the offer he hinted at, the memories of the past she tried not to dwell on. She stood in the tiny kitchen of her 2-bedroom apartment, stirring oatmeal on the stove while the morning light peeked through the cracked blinds. Jordan was already dressed, his backpack slung over his shoulder, and Maya sat at the small table, scribbling a poem into her worn notebook. "Mama," Maya asked, not looking up, "what does someday mean?" Rachel blinked. "Why? I read it in one of Jordan's essays." He said, "Someday, I'll make Mama proud." She paused. "But aren't you proud now?" Rachel smiled softly. Her voice caught in her throat, but she held it back. "Of course I am, baby. I'm proud every day." She looked at both of them, these beautiful, brilliant children who didn't even know the battle she fought just to keep lights on, food on the table, hope alive. Rachel kissed Maya's forehead, then turned back to the stove. That afternoon, after dropping Maya at school and walking Jordan to the bus, Rachel made her way to Rosie's kitchen for her shift. She wore the same navy apron, her sneakers a little more worn, her smile a little more forced. But Thomas was already waiting. This time, he wasn't wearing his usual sleek suit. He had on jeans, a plain navy sweater, and that same gentle fire in his eyes. When Rachel stepped in, he stood up from his booth. "You ready for this?" he asked. Rachel frowned. "Ready for what?" He smiled and handed her a folder. Inside was a printed sheet with a bold heading. "The Parker Project, a business proposal for Rosie's second chance." Rachel stared at it, stunned. "What is this?" "I stayed up last night thinking," Thomas said. "You said you didn't want handouts. That's fine. But I can give you a hand up. This proposal, it's for a business we can start together. A community café, owned by you, run by you, designed to hire and train women like you. Single moms, caregivers, women who've been overlooked and underestimated." Rachel slowly sat down, flipping through the pages. There were outlines, a draft budget, even a tentative lease proposal for a location in a busier part of the city. "You did all this in one night?" she asked, bewildered. Thomas shrugged. "When something's right, you don't wait. You move. I've spent years funding startups for guys in hoodies with zero life experience. It's time to invest in someone who's already lived it." Rachel looked up at him, her eyes moist. "Thomas, I don't even know what to say." "Say yes," he said softly. "Say yes to building something that's yours. You've held everyone else up for so long. Let me help hold you up now." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know anything about running a cafe." "You didn't know anything about law when we were freshmen," he countered. "Didn't stop you from being top of the class. You'll learn. I'll bring in a team to help with setup. You'll hire who you trust. This'll be your name on the front. Your story behind every meal." Rachel swallowed hard. 4 years, her world had shrunk to the size of a diner booth, grocery lists, and overdue bills. This was a window opening to a view she had stopped hoping for. "You think people will come?" she whispered. He smiled. "They won't come for me. But they'll come for your food, your heart, your story. Especially when they learn who you are." Rachel leaned back, holding the folder to her chest like it was a lifeline. "Thomas, why are you doing this?" His answer was simple. Because I can. And because no one did it for you when they should have. Rachel stared at him, blinking back tears. For a long time, she hadn't let herself cry. Not when the eviction notice came. Not when her mama passed. Not even when she watched Jordan walk to school in shoes 2 sizes too small. But today, sitting across from the boy she once studied case law with, the man who had become a billionaire and still remembered who she was beneath the apron and weariness, today, she allowed herself to feel it all. Okay, she said, finally. Let's do it. Thomas smiled, relieved. You won't regret it. But what Rachel didn't know, what Thomas hadn't told her yet, was that this café was just the beginning. He had already spoken to local banks, community partners, and even an old friend at the mayor's office. His plan wasn't just a business. It was a movement. A quiet revolution to open doors that had been shut too long. And at the heart of it all was Rachel Parker. As they stood together in front of Rosie's, the city buzzed around them, unaware that something powerful had just begun. Not because a billionaire waved his wand, but because a woman who had been broken, bent, and overlooked had finally been given a chance to rise. And she wasn't going to waste it. 2 weeks later, Rachel Parker stood in the center of what would soon become her cafe. The space still smelled of fresh drywall and sawdust. The sign outside hadn't been hung yet, but in her mind, she already saw it glowing. Parker's Table. Home cooked, home loved. The place wasn't big, just one wide room with an open kitchen, a chalkboard wall, and room for about 20 tables. But to Rachel, it was her dream on solid ground. Her name. Her vision. And finally, her chance. Thomas had handled the business end with remarkable speed. He brought in a local architect to help design the space with a warm, inviting feel. The floors were hardwood. The colors were soft earth tones. A mural of strong black women from history, painted by a teenage artist from the West End, would soon cover one wall. And Rachel. She was in charge of the heart. She spent hours scribbling recipes, testing cornbread textures, balancing spice levels in her collard greens. She wanted Parker's Table to taste like home, especially for those who had never truly had one. Her menu would honor her mama, her grandma, and every black woman who ever made a meal out of nothing. But as she built something beautiful, shadows started to creep in. It began with the supplier. Rachel had found a local farm-to-table supplier for her produce. The prices were fair, and she liked the idea of supporting nearby growers. But when she called to finalize the order, the man on the line sounded cold. "You sure this is for your business?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Rachel said politely. Parker's Table, opening soon on Auburn Avenue. A pause. Then a slight chuckle. "Didn't realize folks like you were opening restaurants down there now." Rachel's hand gripped the phone tighter. "Folks like me. You know what I mean," he said. Then his voice dropped lower. "Listen, we've got a waiting list, and I don't want to waste your time. Maybe try someone else." Click. Rachel sat there, stunned. It wasn't just rejection. It was dismissal. The kind where you weren't just turned away, you were told you didn't belong. She tried not to let it get to her. She told herself it was just one vendor. But it kept happening. The bank called with new requirements for processing payments, even though Thomas had guaranteed the funds. The inspector delayed her approval for 2 weeks, citing tiny infractions that other shops were never questioned about. A neighbor even filed a noise complaint during construction hours. It became clear that someone, or several someones, weren't happy about a black woman owning a business in a historic district known for its gentrification battles. One afternoon, Rachel stepped out of the cafe and found a note taped to the glass. "Stay in your lane." No signature. Just 4 words that carried generations of hate. Rachel held the paper, hands shaking. She felt it all pressing down. The doubt, the fear, the old voice in her head whispering, "You don't belong here. You never did. She almost turned around and walked away. But then, she thought of Maya. Of Jordan. Of all the times she bit her tongue at Rosie's. Of every woman who scrubbed floors and served food and kept this country running while never being seen. She marched back inside. That evening, she called Thomas. I don't think they want me here, she said, voice quiet. He was silent for a beat. Then that means you have to be there. Rachel didn't reply. Thomas continued. Racism doesn't just slam doors. It whispers lies. It tells you you're not worthy. That you're alone. But you're not, Rachel. Not this time. You've got me. And you've got the truth. She let out a shaky breath. It's just hard, Thomas. Every step forward, there's a hand trying to push me back. I know, he said. But those hands can't touch what's already yours. The next day, Rachel showed up with new energy. She called in her childhood friend Tamika, a single mom and retired caterer, to help with the menu. She hired 2 teens from the neighborhood to train as wait staff. She invited the local Black Business Network to her soft launch event. And she made a decision. Every Sunday, she would serve a pay-what-you-can meal for families in need. If they didn't want her there, she'd make sure the people did. And they did. Word began to spread. A write-up in a local blog praised her menu and her story. A customer who'd tasted her peach cobbler at a trial event posted a glowing video that racked up thousands of views. A retired civil rights lawyer from the neighborhood stopped in one afternoon and said, "We've been waiting for you, baby. This street belongs to us too." Rachel smiled at that. It was still hard. There were still obstacles. But something had shifted. She no longer walked in afraid. She walked in ready. Because this wasn't just about a cafe. It was about taking up space. It was about showing her kids, and the whole community, that no matter what others said, they belonged. The grand opening of Parker's Table was set for a sunny Saturday, and the whole neighborhood seemed to buzz with anticipation. Flyers had been posted in grocery stores, beauty salons, and church bulletin boards. A small radio spot even ran on a local station, donated airtime by a Black-owned media outlet that believed in lifting up their own. Rachel was up before dawn that day, pacing the kitchen one last time, double-checking the prep work, and making sure every tablecloth was wrinkle-free. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what this day meant. After years of being told she wasn't enough, of being overlooked, underestimated, and uninvited, this was her moment. Her daughter Maya wore a hand-sewn apron that read, "Assistant Manager," while Jordan helped stack the cornbread baskets with a seriousness that made Rachel smile through her nerves. At 10 sharp, the doors opened, and within the hour, a line wrapped around the block. The scent of slow-braised oxtails and buttered grits pulled people in from all corners of town. There were young couples, elderly neighbors, college kids, and whole families, all eager to see what the buzz was about. But they weren't just showing up for the food. They came for the story. A black woman who went from wiping counters at Rosie's Diner to owning her own place in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood? That was more than a menu. It was a statement. Parker's Table was more than a restaurant. It was a reclamation. Thomas stood off to the side, watching it all with quiet pride. He didn't want attention. This was Rachel's dream. He was just the one lucky enough to witness it unfold. He caught Rachel's eye across the room and gave her a subtle nod. She nodded back, cheeks flushed with heat and joy. Then she turned back to the stove, where Tamika was helping her plate the day's special, smothered pork chops with a dash of sweet heat, a tribute to Rachel's grandmother. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. Around 2:30 p.m., just as the second wave of lunch customers was settling in, Rachel stepped outside to get a breath of fresh air. That's when she noticed a black pickup truck parked across the street. 2 white men sat inside, watching the restaurant. One wore sunglasses, the other had a toothpick between his lips. They weren't looking at the menu. They weren't smiling. Rachel felt her stomach drop. It wasn't the first time she'd seen that look, that quiet, simmering rage aimed at someone daring to rise too high, too fast, in a world that didn't like to see black excellence on display. Tamika came to the door and followed Rachel's gaze. She murmured. They're not here for cobbler. Rachel was about to head back inside when a sharp sound cracked through the air. Pop. Then, another. Pop. And suddenly, thick black smoke started curling out from the back alley of the building. Fire! Someone shouted. Chaos erupted. People jumped from their seats, some screaming, others knocking over chairs in the scramble to get out. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat. Maya was inside. Jordan too. She pushed through the crowd, yelling for her kids. She found them near the counter, wide-eyed but unharmed, clinging to each other. Out back now, she cried, her voice cutting through the panic. She ushered them toward Tamika, who led them to safety. Then Rachel ran toward the smoke. In the alley behind the building, flames licked up the dumpster, dancing against the back wall. But it wasn't just trash burning, she saw it immediately. A broken beer bottle with a blackened rag sticking from the top lay shattered nearby. A Molotov cocktail. Someone had tried to burn the restaurant down, on the very day it opened. Rachel didn't freeze. She grabbed the fire extinguisher they kept in the kitchen and began spraying. Jordan, brave beyond his years, ran to grab the hose from the front landscaping and helped douse the flames. The fire department arrived 10 minutes later and quickly extinguished the rest. They confirmed what Rachel already knew. It was arson. But when the police showed up, the attitude was disappointingly flat. Could have been kids messing around, one officer said with a shrug. Rachel stared at him. Kids don't throw Molotovs at new businesses. There's no camera in the alley, another officer added. We'll file a report, but there's not much we can do. Rachel stood there, ash on her arms, heart pounding with disbelief. The damage was mostly external, but the message was clear. We see you. We don't want you here. Leave. As the officers packed up, a younger black woman from the fire department walked over quietly. She leaned in and said, "Ma'am, you need to get cameras installed today. And you need community eyes. This might not be the last time." Rachel nodded, jaw clenched. She didn't cry. Not yet. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone home and the smoke had cleared, Rachel stood inside the quiet café. Tables were still half-bussed. The scent of burnt plastic lingered faintly. Maya was curled up in a booth, exhausted. Jordan sat beside her, flipping through his sketchbook, silent but present. Thomas returned just before dusk. He had driven straight from a board meeting to check on her. When he walked in and saw the scorch marks on the brick outside, his face darkened. "You okay?" he asked gently. Rachel looked up. "They tried to burn it all down," she said. He came closer. "But they didn't." She nodded. "No, they didn't." He hesitated, then asked, "What now?" Rachel looked around the room. Her hands still shook slightly, but her eyes were steady. "We open tomorrow. On time. And with extra cornbread." Thomas let out a soft, proud laugh. "You sure?" She nodded. "They thought they'd scare me off. But I've been through worse than fire. I've survived silence. I've survived being invisible. I've survived being told I don't belong." That night, she went home and posted a message on the café's social media page. "To whoever tried to burn us down, you just lit a fire in us. We're not going anywhere. Parker's table opens again tomorrow. And the sweet tea's on the house." The next morning, the line outside was longer than ever. The weeks following the fire didn't bring fear, they brought something far stronger, unity. Parker's table didn't just reopen, it flourished. What was meant to be a quiet, local soul food cafe became a full-blown community landmark. Folks who had never heard of Rachel Parker were now driving across counties just to shake her hand, to taste her food, to sit inside a space that had survived hate and stood tall in love. The wall that once had scorch marks from the fire now held a beautiful mural, a golden phoenix rising from flames, painted by a local black artist who said Rachel's strength reminded him of his own mother. Above it were 3 words, handwritten by Maya herself: "We rise anyway." Rachel was back in her element, but with more purpose than ever. Each plate she prepared was a testimony. Each smile to a guest was a seed planted in fertile ground. People came hungry, and they left full, of food, of hope, and of the story of a woman who refused to be burned out. The café became more than just a business. It became a message. School teachers began bringing students in for lunch and life lessons. Retired veterans stopped by and tipped triple, just to thank Rachel for standing tall. Black-owned businesses started networking through the café, using Parker's table as neutral, trusted ground. It was a ripple of change, and Rachel, humble, steady, faithful Rachel, stood at the center. Thomas was still around, quiet in his support. He never tried to claim credit, never stepped in the spotlight. He knew what this journey was about. It wasn't just about helping a friend or investing in a business. It was about restoring something that had been taken from far too many: dignity. One afternoon, while he and Rachel sat on the back steps sipping lemonade, he asked, "Have you thought about what's next?" Rachel glanced at him. "I just got started." He smiled. "Exactly." 2 weeks later, a letter came in the mail. Thick envelope. Gold seal. It was from the National Black Chamber of Commerce, inviting Rachel to speak at a conference in Washington, D.C., about black female entrepreneurship in underserved communities. She read it twice before letting out a stunned laugh. "Me? Speak?" Jordan looked up from his schoolwork and said, "Why not, Mama? You already taught me more than they ever do in school." She hugged him tight, fighting tears. In that moment, she realized something important. Her café wasn't the destination. It was the beginning. When Rachel stood at that podium weeks later, wearing a simple navy blue dress and her mother's necklace, the room of professionals, CEOs, and non-profit leaders went silent. She didn't speak like someone trying to impress a crowd. She spoke like a woman who had lived it. She told them about the years she spent cleaning tables, not because she wasn't smart, but because society never handed her another choice. She told them about raising 2 children alone in a city that tried to erase her worth. She told them about the fire, and how it only lit her resolve. And then she said something that made every head nod in agreement. "We don't need saving. We need space. We need our own tables. And when they try to keep us out, we build new doors." The speech went viral. News outlets covered her story. Oprah's team called, asking for an interview. Orders started coming in for Rachel's sweet potato pie from as far away as Oregon. She partnered with local food distributors to ship her products across state lines. And within 6 months, Parker's Table wasn't just a single café. It was a brand. But Rachel didn't stop there. She started a scholarship fund in her mother's name, the Lena Parker Legacy Grant, offering financial aid and mentorship to single black mothers wanting to attend culinary school. Tamika, who had been with Rachel since day one, became her business partner and led training programs for young women in the neighborhood. Jordan helped design a children's cookbook series inspired by his mom's recipes. And Maya? She was now the café's social media director, a whiz at storytelling with her phone and her words. Rachel was building more than just a business. She was building a future. One afternoon, almost a year after the grand opening, Rachel stood outside Parker's Table and took it all in. The mural, the warm buzz of conversation, the smell of Sunday roast in the air. She looked at her reflection in the front glass. No longer the tired waitress from Rosie's, but a proud, standing, thriving woman with the world still ahead of her. Thomas joined her a moment later, carrying 2 coffees. He handed her one and said, "I guess you finally got your dream." She shook her head, eyes shining. "No. I got more than that. I got my name back. I got my voice." He nodded. "And you made sure everyone else could hear it." They stood there in silence for a long time, two college friends who had walked two very different roads and somehow ended up at the same place. Then Rachel turned to him, smiling. You know, it's funny. They tried to set fire to this place. But the only thing they did was light the path. And in that golden hour, with the city humming around them and a long line of customers still waiting to come inside, it was clear to anyone watching, Rachel Parker wasn't just cooking food. She was feeding a movement. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to check out more of our videos. We have plenty of inspiring and powerful stories waiting for you. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.